Now, there we go. Welcome to Lansing Online News Radio. This is Bonnie Buckaroo, soon to be joined by Bill Castanier. This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. And we have an action-packed evening this evening. We're going to be joined by Ray Holman of the United Auto Workers, talking about some of the issues related to our new right-to-work legislation. Then we'll be joined by Christina Strong, who has a new documentary film about the higher cost of higher ed, and that's going to be an interesting discussion. And we will close with Bill has been involved in his poem a day for the month of April, and Sam Mills, local poet, is going to come in and read a poem. One of the ones maybe that's been published.
Nope, it'll be published tomorrow. Tomorrow is
We're getting
Sam Mills Day.
An advance peek. Yes, and we have other things coming up. The Michigan Notable Books, for one. Bill is very active with that group.
It is this Saturday. There is 20 books each year selected as the Notable Books for Michigan, and it is at the State Library. And the big deal this year is Michael Moore is doing the keynote.
That's
now Michael's book, Here Comes Trouble, a memoir, won last year. It was one of the notable books, and he couldn't make the event. So he's coming back this year to do the keynote, which is pretty interesting.
I wonder if the recent events will change what it is he's going to talk about. He's so political that it may well.
When he gets up to talk, I don't think he knows what he's going to say until he puts himself on that stage, and so you could get a lot of interesting things.
Yeah.
Because I've seen him a couple times, and he's been real gentle once, and the other time it was like, wow.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting.
You never know which Michael Moore will show up.
I'd love to know what movie he's at work on. He certainly can.
We'll see if we can find out.
I would appreciate it. I'd like to know what he's been up to lately in terms of
video. Yeah.
Love Story, Capitalism, a Love Story, I think was the last one that's been out in the list. So that sort of brings us. You said somebody else is coming in. One of the authors.
Well, one of the authors, Mark Benelli, who wrote "Hey, Detroit City is the Place to Be," is going to be at the Capital Area District Library Thursday, May 2nd, and he'll be there at 7 p.m. And he did an interesting thing. He grew up near Detroit, and he delivered his father's sharpened blades into Detroit for the meat cutting industry. But instead of doing what other reporters did, fly in for a day or a weekend and then fly out, he moved there. He lived just across from Eastern Market, where John Sinclair stayed, actually. He ran into John Sinclair a few times. But what he did is, instead of driving around the city, he rode his bicycle. So he ran into a lot of very interesting people. And you've heard me talk about Charlie LaDuff's Detroit. Mm-hmm. Charlie's a little bit edgier than he is, but he's just sort of the flip side of him. He tells the story in a very congenial way, but it's still the same story. He doesn't paint it over. It's still a rough city trying to survive. And I think getting an opportunity to see him here will be pretty special. He's a reporter for the Rolling Stone, and he's been that for about 10 years. He's quite prolific in his writing. He writes quite a bit. I've never paid any attention to bylines. I had to go back and look.
Yeah.
And then I realized I'd read some of his stories.
There is a whole subgenre now of Detroit, sort of the verbal equivalent of ruin porn, talking about the dark underbelly of the city, all the problems that it has, the interesting characters along the way.
Absolutely, and I call it literary ruins porn.
Yeah.
Because it is. And he decided he did not want to take that tack. He said he was kind of mixed emotions about it, but he definitely didn't want to go that direction. He thought that the people that lived there had seen enough of it.
Mm-hmm.
So he's got a little different approach. Like I say, it's a little gentler, but it's the same story. There's no question about it. It's no lights, firefighters living in tents in Highland Park, volunteering to put out fires. I mean, it's still a pretty amazing story.
Detropia, the documentary, does quite a bit of documenting a lot of the same things, and it does have that ruin porn touch to it. I mean, the photography is gorgeous, and it makes the decay of the city look appealing in some ways and very vivid. So it's always a challenge to figure out how to get Detroit quite right.
Well, the person that did, I believe that did Detropia and wrote a book, or had the books that was very similar, was it 10 years ago, proposed that they just let everything decay
Hmm.
and see what happens.
Yeah.
Make it an
Giant urban experiment.
urban experiment.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. There's everybody who thinks they've had the plan to turn the city around has sort of come a cropper trying to do so. I don't know what's going to happen, but I think the next decade will be interesting to see where Detroit is. Detroit won't be the same 10 years from now as it is today, but I don't know in which direction.
I don't think anyone does, and that's kind of his conclusion is where it'll go and what the financial manager might be able to accomplish is still up in the air. You know, the one point he did make to me in my article in City Pulse on Wednesday was that this the emergency financial manager, you know, he's taking credit for helping save Chrysler. He says what they forget to mention is there was a huge infusion of federal funds
Right.
to save that.
Yeah.
And no one's got the stomach to do that in Detroit.
No, and I don't think we'll see that kind of funding come along again. Despite the fact that one of the things I did want to talk about tonight was the Reinhart Rogoff research that was the foundation for a lot of the European austerity programs, the kind of programs that the Republicans are trying to push here. And there was the graduate student who went in and took a look at the foundational materials that Reinhart and Rogoff had produced and found errors in their Excel spreadsheets and had discovered that they didn't transcribe certain data correctly. And now Rogoff and Reinhardt have come back with their answer and saying, well, our conclusions are still valid. And the kid came back again and said, well, the new data that you provided is off as well. So there's quite a battle going on in academia about how reliable some of that research is.
And you wonder how often it happens.
Well, and it's interesting to hear. I've listened to Rogoff on the Sunday talk shows, and he's insisting, of course, that he never drew it was only a correlation between the idea that if you had a certain amount of debt, your growth would start to stall, and that he was never urging this as public policy because it wasn't cause and effect. Well, I listened to him on those shows, and I didn't see him holding back. He was making it very clear that if you got over 90% debt, that somehow your economy
Right.
would start to stall. And it turns out the Europeans did take that very seriously, and a lot of their policy is based on that assumption, and now the assumption proves false. I mean, it's just staggering to me to think that that could happen in this era.
Well, it's not only staggering, but it's to me there's a certain amount of disbelief that we really take very many of the reports that come out of universities serious in a lot of ways because
Well,
they're pretty sketchy, some of them.
one of the problems is, if you read through the research, you begin to poke holes in it. I've had that happen more than once. I remember one of the first research studies I read, I was looking at a table and realized the person was commenting on the table and they had the numbers exactly reversed. So all the conclusions had to be wrong one way or the other. Either the table was wrong or their conclusions were wrong. But nobody had picked it up, despite the fact that peer review research is supposed to be gone over very carefully. Part of the problem is that busy people still miss things. In this case, some of the underlying foundational materials, Rogoff and Reinhardt were willing to share them, which researchers don't always do. And now a lot of it is copyrighted, even though it's government-funded research. You can't get your hands on the foundational Excel spreadsheets because the Elsevier company that handles a lot of that material is pretty quick to not grant copyright access to people.
You know, I recall a conversation I had with somebody who was just in an audience about publishing in the new world, electronic publishing. And he said that's going to become commonplace because average people often find problems with things if they have the printed thing that they can get out of a library somewhere.
Yes.
That's no longer the case. You can't do that.
No, it's
A
going
lot
to
of
be
journals you cannot get, except
very,
big time,
very difficult, and they're very expensive.
very expensive.
And
Hundreds and thousands of dollars. Some of them.
there's a real movement to demand increasing transparency in exchange for the government money that we use to subsidize that research. That as long as the government is subsidizing the research, it should be easy for everybody because we could crowdsource a lot more of this material and ensure its accuracy if we made it widely available to the public. That's part of what the young gentleman who was unfortunately at the end of the long arm of the government who committed suicide, Jason Schwartz,
Right.
who um, he was trying to get his hands on free open material, but you're just not allowed to download it as often and as frequently and as much as he did. It's supposed to be open to you. Lots of changes coming in that world, I suspect.
There's still a lot of promises the web has to deliver on.
Mm. Well, we are joined by our first guest who has seen what's happening as governments decide to install austerity programs and worry more about debt and talk about how we need to be shedding government jobs And it was all based on this idea that if we didn't do that soon, we'd be Greece. And Ray Holman of the United Auto Workers has watched as that's an idea that's sort of infected the public discourse nowadays. We talk a lot more, it seems, about reducing the debt than we do about generating jobs, don't we?
We definitely do, and I've actually had that exact conversation with lawmakers. I've been told, we don't want to become Greece,
Yeah.
quote unquote. And I'm like, okay, well, that's fine. I don't necessarily want to become Greece either, but please fund at least some basic services.
Yeah. And all those dollars turn in the economy. So if you keep government employees, where we've really been losing, we've been generating private sector jobs at a fairly anemic rate, but it's been in the plus column. But where we've been in the negative column is that we're shedding far too many government jobs. We can't keep people in those jobs. That means that they can't purchase things, they can't pay taxes, they end up consuming services rather than providing income to others. So do you think this will change the discussion and the dialogue?
You know, I'm not sure. Right now we're looking at Department of Human Services budget. It just came out of subcommittee that would cut 1,000 employees. And this is really insane. And I'll tell you why. Because right now we're under the authority of a federal judge in Detroit because in the past we did not have enough caseworkers to appropriately provide child welfare services. And the idea that we would cut 1,000 workers, and quite a few of those are actually frontline investigators, working in the neighborhoods, and to cut those positions would just mean fines and penalties and end up hurting the cost the taxpayer. So, we still see this rush to privatize government services and to shrink government. And I keep reminding people when you're looking at the state workforce, which of course that's who I represent, state employees with the UAW Local 6,000. We're at levels that haven't been seen since the 1960s, and we're still doing more and more with less all the time. And I'm trying to tell people that it makes no sense to cut those positions. And again, when you're talking about privatization, we have 3 juvenile facilities left in the state. There's one in Whitmore Lake, there's one in lower northern Michigan around Petoskey area, and there's one Bay Pines in the UP. And these are specialized facilities. These are places, quite frankly, for kids that have been involved in sex offenses
Yeah.
or severely mentally ill, and there's no other appropriate settings for them. But just because the state owns the 3 facilities, let's cut them. Let's privatize them. What's the plan for the youth that are in those facilities? There is no plan. All new foster care cases should go to the private agencies. Not because it's based on any research saying that's more effective or it can save money, but just this almost a religion some lawmakers have to
Yeah.
privatize
Yeah.
government and to shrink government no matter what the reality is. And unfortunately, I feel like Groundhog Day.
Groundhog
Yeah,
Day.
thank you. Yeah, I wake up and I'm fighting the same battles day after day after day. And so that's sort of the way I see it in the ground level, anyway, here at the state capitol.
I used to do quite a bit of work with the Bureau of Juvenile Justice. When we had a much more significant program, they were trying to implement restorative justice. They were eager to shrink the size of the facilities and try to do more work with the kids in communities because you might be able to prove that you could keep the kids from committing crimes as long as they were in the facility, but you didn't have much proof that you were improving the odds they wouldn't be even more dangerous when they went back to the community. So the real challenge was to find ways, but that takes intensive services. The kind of wraparound services that make sure that the family is taken care of, healthcare is taken care of, dental is taken care of, mental health services, substance abuse counseling, all of the different services required, plus educational, additional tutoring and help for young people. That's an expensive system, but for every dollar you put in at the front end, you're saving 2 at the other end. And those are good jobs for people to have on top. I mean, I don't understand why we're being so short-sighted in our economic priorities. We're still going to pay. The question is when and in what way. I think there are a whole bunch of people right now who wish that somebody had been looking a little bit more closely at those 2 brothers in Boston. Had a few more community policing officers out in the neighborhood hearing the scuttlebutt on the street about violence in the family and, some of the domestic violence incidents that may not have been reported to police. I mean, that's what you really need. You need people engaged in the community doing those services.
Yeah, absolutely. And you need people that know the communities that are invested, people that are going to stay in their job, for more than a few years, and that's when you get the quality service. And the other when you're talking about child welfare and juvenile justice, those type of issues too, unfortunately, people, it's not the people that work for the private agencies are bad or they're not skilled. It's just the system is set up as a perverse system, a perverse incentive, I guess, where private agencies quite often get a per diem rate. So they're being paid to house kids instead of trying to find permanency for children necessarily. And, those are type of issues you run into. And also, the state's still responsible. So if you privatize a prison and somebody escapes and murders people, the state's still ultimately responsible. The state's still going to get sued, meaning the taxpayer is still on the hook for all that stuff. So, again, I feel like I'm fighting these fights year after year after year at the Capitol. I've been down there almost 5 years in my position now. But it's an important fight, and I'm going to keep telling people it's not a good idea to, basically cut away at the social safety net that we have here in Michigan. The other thing, too, is when you're talking about DHS workers in the branch office, they want to cut those positions by another 223 workers. And that means their caseloads are going to go up another 7%, according to the House Fiscal Agency. Well, that means potentially the single parent living in a car doesn't come in and gets the service they need. The case is going to bleed over to the Children Protective Services side, and then you got the police involved, you got the courts involved, maybe foster care is involved. It's much more expensive instead of addressing the problem up front. And again, so these are the arguments that we're having. Seems like year after year at the Capitol. And unfortunately, that budget came out of the House committee. A Senate passed another version of the DHS budget that still cut workers. It was not quite as drastic as the House version, but we'll have to wait and see what happens when it gets to the governor's desk.
Ray, I've got a question. Do we need to cut state government spending anymore?
We don't, and I'm glad you asked that, and I'll tell you why.
Good question.
Because we're not broke. Okay, newsflash, we're not broke anymore. We were, when I first started the job in 2008, 2009, we were in trouble at that point. But right now, there's a $500 million in the rainy day fund. So in terms of state government, that's another thing. We don't necessarily need to do that because we have a $500 million. They don't want to spend it on things like caseworkers. They want to look good for the bondholders, right? Wall Street. But we got that extra money. So no, the state's not broke.
They've been busy collecting all those extra taxes from you, Bill. You were toting those up not too long ago about all the things that have happened to retired state workers, and they're just being asked to give back and give back while the corporations are getting that money transferred
everybody
to them.
pays pension taxes now too, though.
Yeah.
And
that's true.
The governor kind of mentioned this, and Rick Hagelin of MLive wrote about it. He said it might be a policy to make elderly people leave the state and attract younger people. Now, the logic about it, how do you attract younger people with that? Maybe jobs open? I wasn't quite sure what he was getting at. But
they seem keen on turning us into Indiana, so the jobs that will be luring them there are the ones where you're saying, would you like fries with that served?
Yeah.
And not the ones that give you anything that you can raise a family on. And I suppose then they want you to flee before you retire to some state that's going to be generous? I don't think so.
It's very, the logic was real specious. I mean, it's kind of like that research we're talking about. That's where they're getting their information, I think.
Well, speaking of research, we did discover that the Mackinac Center was going to be providing all of the research on legislation to MLive through one of its subsidiaries, but now that Zach Pohl and Progress Michigan identified that idea has gone away.
That's my see no evil, hear no evil. I mean, how stupid can you be? Thank you, MLive. Sorry.
And they were arguing, of course, that they wouldn't make money on it, but of course, when you have money flowing in the door to pay for things, that means that you can use your funds for other
Plus,
things.
they were getting exposure. I mean, the first click-through right on their page was provided by the Mackinac Center.
There is this, but you're right, Ray. I think it is almost like a religion. Because it's built on belief and not on facts. I don't think that the Reinhard Rogoff research is going to make any difference because it was never built on facts to begin with. They would appropriate that research when it was to their benefit, but they would ignore any of the research put out by Paul Krugman and other economists who have a different view. It's really based on the idea that government is evil, government is always doing things that are intrusive and ugly and unconstitutional and that you can't trust them. So as long as you believe that, this idea of shrinking government, I guess, is just very pervasive nowadays. I think the pendulum on that has started to swing a bit, though. Don't you think?
Well, it's kind of interesting you say that. Kind of also depends on who's in control because now we see that state governments telling all the locals what to do and sending in emergency managers and these type of things. So it's an interesting time that we're living in. But again, going back to the state workforce, even though we proved to lawmakers that it doesn't save money, and just recently there was an RFP, a request for proposal, to privatize all the health care and mental health work within the Department of Corrections, which was huge. It was,
Big contract.
yeah, $306 million a year to provide those services. And you're talking about 1,300 professional state employees, nurses, psychologists, etc. And companies tried to come in and submit bids, but they couldn't prove that they could save the state any money. And we had a counter proposal, the UAW Local 6000 did, and basically ran our own numbers. We hired somebody from U of M, and we showed actually where state employees are a great deal.
Yeah.
Or at least in this case they were. And the look on their face when they were told by the budget department, in essence, that these companies weren't going to get this contract was priceless. And some of the lawmakers were not too happy. In fact, the chair of the Department of Corrections is a person named Greg McMasters, who gave the department quite a tongue lashing and thought that the budget department and the Department of Correction wasn't fair, that they didn't bend over backwards enough for the private contracts. So sure enough, there's new legislation that's been introduced since that RFP decision was made that says that government cannot compete with private agencies. Meaning, I suppose, if you were to serve breakfast in the prison and a private agency could do that, the state would have to step down and say, oh, no, we can't do that because a private agency can do that. Now, this legislation sounds crazy, but we're taking it very seriously because 2 years ago I didn't think Michigan would become the 24th right to work state, and we are. And so some of this legislation is sitting in other states as well. They're not moving out of committees. I forget I want to say Tennessee, but I could be wrong. But there's some similar legislation about this no compete. Government can't compete. So it's out there, and there's people thinking about it. So we're still taking it very seriously. Whether it becomes a law here in Michigan, I would doubt. But again, you can see the way certain individuals, certain lawmakers are thinking.
This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. We're talking with Ray Holman of the United Auto Workers. And, after seeing the gun control legislation go down, completely down, I mean, it was such a watered-down bill, it didn't matter if it passed or not. But Obama threw all of his weight behind it. 90% of the people at least wanted background checks. And it proves that the will of the people really isn't being translated into the legislation at both the state and the federal level, that the powerful forces of crony capitalism, for example, in this case, I'm sure there are companies out there salivating for the thought of getting a $300 million contract to do those services. They would be delighted to be able to do that and not have to pay union wages, so that's a wonderful way to add in their profit margin. Those are the kinds of things that should really raise our concerns in this era of inequality.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're talking also about basic safety issues, public safety. The thing is, if you don't provide appropriate health care in the prisons, it endangers the entire state because you don't want sick people released. And you also don't want to get in a situation where people are trying to maximize profits by withholding care for people, ultimately just making the situation worse for everybody involved, not to mention the staff that's in the prisons dealing with the inmates. And, we tried to explain to the lawmakers, and some did listen, that when you administer health care inside a secure setting, it's a lot different than it is, out in a public setting. And so this whole idea that state or public services or public government's always bad and we need to shrink or do away with it is something, again, that we constantly face. But I think it's just a motivational factor that they have, regardless of what the facts are. I mean, it's just what I've been seeing, that certain lawmakers just want to privatize at all costs, and ultimately, that's a great way to bust the unions too. State employees, we are not under the right to work law because we're civil servants. But if we privatize all our jobs, it's not going to really matter. We're not going to have much of a union if all this work gets sent to private agencies. So it's another good way to chip away at union
That's what
power.
we're seeing next with education, isn't it?
I think so. Yeah.
I mean, that's where that's headed. The idea that there has been a sort of skunk works group working on plans for the governor to be able to introduce, which would really end public education and move it into charter school, various models of charter schools. I mean, there's simply illogical to suggest that you can run something, you have X amount of dollars to spend on something, and taking out 5, 10, or 15% profit out of that total means that somehow they can run it better in the private sector than you can in the public. The only place that can really come out of is wages. I
Yeah.
mean, that profit is going to go to somebody, and it's going to keep filtering the money up and up and up to the top 1 and 2% again and again and again.
Right.
And that's the challenge, I think. I don't know. I mean, do we have the power to reverse this, Rick?
It's been very frustrating over the last 3 or 4 years just to see the different legislation that's passed. Seeing how difficult it is, for unions to collect dues. Um, I'm not sure what's going to happen. I think there's going to be changes. I think we need to look at things in a different way. One thing that I'm seeing, around the country is these associations, like of part-time workers that are coming together, lobbying for health
Oh,
care,
oh.
paralegal people that walk. A lot of people work for law firms and they don't have full-time employment, but they're kind of doing these associations where they can lobby together. You're seeing the city of New York, for example, passing legislation saying you have to provide sick leave to restaurant workers.
Yes.
And so I think we need to think about things in those terms. And there's different ways to be successful to stand up and protect working people. Interestingly enough, there's legislation in Michigan that's saying that when you're talking about big and little government, that local communities could not pass such laws in Michigan, meaning the city of Detroit could not pass a law saying restaurant workers would be allowed to have sick leave. They would make a state law preventing that from happening. So here's that. This is an example of when it switched to when it seems like the far right of the Republican Party likes big government. And in fact, like I said, there's legislation right now trying to prevent that from ever happening in Michigan because it just passed in New York City. So,
Well, Christine Quinn, who was the favored candidate for the New York City Democratic nomination for mayor, was the one who was dragging her feet about supporting that legislation. For those of you who remember Stu Applebaum, who used to be part of the AFL-CIO here with Sam Fishman, I was very surprised to see that his RWDSU put money into Quinn's campaign early on and received a little blowback and heat for doing that because, I mean, we do need to think about protecting wages in that way. And that seems to me to be, what we see is this idea that it's a teenager in high school who's working at the fast food place. 40 to 50% nowadays are people trying to raise families. That's a whole different
Kids
ballgame.
can't get those jobs anymore.
No, they can't. Did you see that in Massachusetts you now have to have a bachelor's degree
Right.
to be the cashier?
What?
Oh,
And you push a button
I
and
know.
match a picture up with a burger.
Ah,
it's true. You're seeing, like you said, it's not just teenagers working at fast food places anymore.
no.
And the other thing too is, I mean, for me, as a person who likes to go out to eat, I don't want somebody sick serving my food. If you're sick, please stay home. And don't
Sneezing
serve-
that nice
Yeah,
norovirus onto
yeah.
your salad. That's a nice thing.
Yeah.
And that's true because they really have no choice then. I mean, they do have to come to work
Well,
sick because you can be fired.
Well, right, and if they're living paycheck to paycheck,
Yeah.
if they don't show up to work, then they don't pay their rent or whatever. Yeah.
I think the real challenge in this country is how do we produce more good jobs?
Yes, definitely.
And that's the challenge.
Before we go, I want to talk about this book, Amphibians and Reptiles of Michigan. It was one of the awardees for notable books. J. Allen Holman.
The name
What-
sounds familiar.
It sounds familiar, but I never put the two together
Oh, is that right?
until just, a couple days ago.
Right.
And
Ah.
I messaged Ray and I said, was that your father? This is awarded posthumously.
Is that right? Oh, that's a wonderful honor, isn't it?
You're going to be there to accept the award, right?
Yeah, I am. And what's funny is I was going to be there anyway because Michael Moore is going to be there.
Yeah.
And one of our bookkeepers bought me a ticket. She's a big Michael Moore fan. And then somebody said, I think your dad's book's being recognized. I'm like, you're kidding. And
Wow.
sure enough, it turns out that this book is. And he wrote that book in 2006 right before he died. And in fact, he met with Wayne State here in East Lansing. He was a professor at Michigan State, my father was, 2 days, unfortunately, before he died of a heart attack. And so that book was basically completed back then, but it just was published last year.
Oh, really?
And one thing too about this book, I met with one of his old colleagues today, Jim Harding, who kind of helped put the finishing touches on the book. Is a message my dad wanted to get out with this is that quite often we're concerned about the exotic species that are becoming extinct, or the big high-profile animals that are being extinct. His real concern was more about the common things, like the gardener snake you don't see as much anymore, or turtles in the area. And so it's not just big exotic animals or the ones that are basically right on edge. He saw a decline of, again, more common type of species like gardener snakes and box turtles and these type of things. So conservation is really near and dear to his heart. So that's the message I'm going to try to put out. If I don't know how much time I'm going to give it, but conservation.
Well, now, did
really
you have
important.
strange pets growing up then in your house, or
Um,
he didn't bring his work home, maybe? Or
My dad was a lifelong, basically, herpetologist. He actually was a paleontologist and a herpetologist. Um, but when he was a little boy, he loved snakes and turtles and salamanders and toads and everything. So he did have quite a collection of these type of things. So yes, to answer your question, we did have a lot in the house.
I figured as much.
As someone who just went over to a friend's house, my friend John Schilling has a bunch of exotic animals and quite a few snakes. It's fun. I mean, it's a really neat lifestyle. He's got the tanks there, and he has all sorts of little critters running around, including a hedgehog. He's got a hedgehog. So
I inherited from my dad a turtle. His name is Springfield because he found him in Springfield, Illinois, or Springfield, Missouri. Excuse me, Springfield, Missouri, in 1964. And I talked with Jim Harding, who more or less took my dad's place at Michigan State at the museum. And we're guessing the turtle is about 90 years old.
Wow.
The turtle's about 90 years old, and they can live to be well over 100, these box turtles. But one thing about the turtle, that animal is one of the most endangered worldwide species that there is, because turtles are slow to develop. They can live a super long time, but you got to get past those first stages. And because of the destruction of habitat around the world, they're really threatened. And they're very successful because they have great ways of adapting to the environment with their shells, etc. But because of the habitat destruction, they're really endangered across the planet. And that's what Jim Harding, my dad's my dad's colleague, told me today. I sort of just wanted to get that out there too.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Important work.
Yeah.
Documenting those animals and making sure people understand how threatened they are.
Right, exactly. And when I grew up in East Lansing, and I remember my dad saying there used to be all kinds of different type of toads and salamanders just in the backyard here in East Lansing, Michigan, that he didn't see it, towards the end of his life that we used to have.
Every year, the peeper population at my house, loud though they may be, seems a little bit smaller. They don't seem to be as numerous as they were before, and that kind of makes you worried.
Yeah, and one thing that's really interesting though is I sort of believe that some wildlife's made a little bit of comeback since the recession. And
we're not
there's not as much. Well, yeah, and maybe it's just my imagination, but since 2008, 2009, if you notice, a lot of the development stalled.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of empty, lots where they were going to give houses, and that gives the opportunity for some of these creatures to make a little bit of a comeback. So that is one maybe small benefit of the economy slowing down.
New Scientist had an interesting article recently, too, that animals have learned that human beings are not as much of a threat to them personally, so they're perfectly willing to move in now. They'll live in your neighborhood. The coyotes are coming in and saying, hey, too bad, we're going to take it back. You're pressuring us. No, we're going to stay here. So we are seeing maybe more of them, even though there may not be more. We don't know.
Well, thank you very much for coming. I'll see you Saturday night.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Bill's going to be down there, I'm sure.
Oh, I am.
Yeah. That's one of. Are you still on the board, Bill?
I am indeed.
You are indeed. Well, we are joined by Christina Strong, and she is a student of mine at Michigan State University, and she is also a filmmaker who has been working on a documentary that she just released, and it's The Expense of Learning, and it is indeed with a $sign in the title, so that we know that what we're really talking about is the cost of higher education these days, higher cost in higher ed. Christina, welcome, and tell us a little bit about what you're trying to accomplish with this film.
Originally, when I started the film project, I was reading articles about the rising cost of tuition, and I had noticed that the media had started to cover it a lot more. Prior to that, years before that, you would never really hear too much about it. All of a sudden, it became like this really big hot topic, like tuition increases and textbook increases and all this kind of stuff. And I was thinking, oh, this has been happening for like, or years before this, like additions are happening yesterday. And so when I was at MSU, I asked a couple of my friends who were in journalism courses if they would be interested in creating this story, basically that told the struggles of college students trying to go to college, whether it's student loans or there's rising tuition or, high priced textbooks. I know, for example, my god sister, whose name is Christina, also, she once told me when she was taking classes that she had to kind of like her grades were suffering because she had to try to borrow textbooks from people or get them out of the library because
Yeah.
she couldn't afford the textbooks, either tuition or it was a textbook, and she couldn't do both. So she had to pick and choose. But because she had to pick and choose, she had to suffer her lower grades in addition to that. So basically, what we did was we started and we said, hey, we want to do this documentary film. We got 13 other students from MSU to work on it. They were all different majors: professional writing, media information, journalism, such as myself. And we all came together and decided we were going to do a film that said, hey, look, we want to go to college, we want to get education, we want jobs. And you keep saying that we need to go to college, we need to go to school and get education if we want to get employed. But if you can't afford it, how are we supposed to be able to do that?
Yeah. Do you think education still pays off? You've looked at enough of the data now, despite the dramatic rise in costs, and the depression in wages that's been going on. Wages have been flat, stagnant, or declining. Does it still pay to get a college education?
I think that's a very good question. And to some degree, I almost think that's a personal choice or answer because for some people, college is not for them. They've already decided that I'm not going to go to college. It's too expensive. I'm not going to go into debt. I'm not going to be burdened to someone else for the rest of my life in order to get a degree, which doesn't guarantee me a job other than at Starbucks. So for me personally, it was definitely a choice that I was going to make to do it, whether I had to take out student loans or not, because I am like the first person in my family to go to college and graduate. So for me, it was important to be a role model for my siblings. So that was a personal choice. Now, whether I end up with a job at Starbucks, hopefully not.
But you know how to hustle.
As your barista, like, here, buddy, here's your white chocolate mocha, like, nice to see you again, make a donation, like, so, I mean, whether that happens, I mean, ideally not. Ideally, I would like a job that, fits my educational background. But I think overall, it's not looking like it's worth it. I mean, a lot of the news that's been coming out lately says that a bachelor's degree is a one-way ticket to a coffee shop, and that if you do want to succeed, you have to go for higher education. But higher education means more loans.
Another $100,000.
Exactly.
Yeah. This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. We're talking with Christina Strong. Now, Christina, you're a bit older than some of the other students in your classes, and I think in some ways that experience having been out in the real world gives you a perspective that maybe they don't yet have.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think you understand the importance that college is an opportunity to build networks, to hustle, to learn how to get that job so you aren't the 50% of the graduating college students who are underemployed or unemployed. A lot of it is really making the most of the experience while you're there as well. I mean, there's certain, you can't just decide to be a doctor or a lawyer just because you really think you're good at it. You have to have the license, but even in fields where it doesn't require a license, a Big Ten education could be pretty valuable in working your way into a career, I would think.
Definitely. I think so. I think a lot of college students don't realize the network they have available to them. I mean, whether you want to start a business or whether you want to get a job. For me, for example, this semester, I came up with a brilliant idea. Well, maybe it's not so brilliant, but I came up with the idea that when we had guest speakers, I'm like, I wonder how many students here actually send thank you notes to these guest speakers when they come in. Not too many.
0.
Exactly.
Bill, who is
like
my
no
common
one.
guest speaker, can guarantee.
Right, no one does that. And so, like, we had a guest speaker come in. Her name was Suzanne, and she came into my TC 351 class, producing for cinema and television. And she was talking about doing some PSAs over the summer. There may be opportunities to work with the state of Michigan. And I said, that'd be awesome. I want more film experience. So I sent her a note after it saying, thank you so much for your presentation. It was very helpful. If you need any help over the summer, I am more than willing. And she emailed me back and said, hey, let's talk, come in, all this kind of stuff. And then also, in addition to that, she also said, send me your resume, and I'll be hiring soon, so we may be able to find you a position with the state of Michigan.
That's how you get jobs. Bill can verify that.
You hustle.
Yeah.
Absolutely, you hustle.
Yeah.
I mean, I did that when I was in college.
Ah.
The same thing. You do the unexpected
Mm-hmm.
to get noticed, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I never went to any of the interviews.
Yeah.
The interviews that you have on campus, they probably still do those. I refused to go to those because everybody did that. It was a cattle call, so I'd call the people and ask them if they want to go for lunch. It was like, okay, it was really easy. I mean, you just don't do the expected.
You have to do something that distinguishes you from the crowd because there are, nowadays when you see, for example, a teaching position comes open and there are 500 resumes that come in. I mean, it's extraordinary to even get an interview out of those kinds of numbers.
Where can a person see this documentary?
Well, currently it's going to play at the East Lansing Public Library in June. I don't have the specific dates yet. It's also playing at the Ludington Center for the Arts Film Festival, Sunday, April 28th, from 7 to 9 p.m. And it will be available on DVD in the fall, and it will be online later in the fall too, sometime around September or October.
There's a teaser video that's available now. We put up the YouTube on Lansing Online News today so that people can get a sort of flavor of it. You had your premiere here on campus over at the Business College. So you're kind of looking at both a business career and journalism. You're combining the two.
Yeah, when I was taking Journal for 30, Media Law Ethics at MSU, I was talking to the professor at the time who was an attorney general for the state of Michigan. And he said, "What do you want to do when you get done?" And I said, "Well, I'm a journalism major, but I'm also a film major, so I can do both. I can do journalism and film and a documentary." I said, "Michael Moore does it, why can't I?" Speaking of Michael Moore. So I just thought that it'd be a good way to put both of my passions together, to be able to do the film aspect of it and the journalistic component.
Today, to be able to tell the stories, I mean, that's the challenge in journalism. It's not just throwing breaking news out there, it's being able to tell the underlying story. What kind of stories did you hear out of students at MSU who are struggling?
Well, some of the stories that I heard was there was one student named Mitchell Swan, and he actually went into the funds that his parents had been saving up for his brother to go to college to pay for his own college education. So they started trying to like put money back into his account, but then his parents started having financial difficulties because of the economic recession. So it's kind of a catch-22 because now the other brother, when he gets to college, there's not going to be much there, if anything at all, when he goes because the other brother had to take it.
Oh,
that's bad.
Yeah, that
Sibling
creates.
rivalry.
I was going to say that could create some tensions within families.
Yeah.
Oh, but when you talk about the rising costs nowadays, what does a textbook cost you for your different classes? What have you paid recently for textbooks? I think people who haven't been to college for a while would be surprised at hearing what some of those textbook cost.
I haven't had to get a textbook in like the last 2 or 3 semesters, luckily, because all of them has been film classes. So I just had to do film and check out equipment from, cast. I never had to actually buy a book. But I think the last one I bought was at least $130.
That's what's a surprise, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What were you able to sell it back for?
Well, you can sell it back for like $20 if you're lucky.
And it's usually out of date. It's out of date every other
Yeah,
year, so
it is.
those are other problems that we're facing. I noticed the other day I sat in on a webinar where in addition to the textbook now they're going to be selling apps for all sorts of other learning opportunities on top. So in addition to buying the textbook, you're going to have to buy the app package. And it's going to have to be run on a tablet, and it's going to have to be run on a specific kind of tablet or phone. So it's going to get pretty tight, isn't it? Are you seeing among your peers that you're seeing quite a few affluent students in college?
Among my peers, maybe international students that I've known that I worked with has a night recept. There was one girl who I did work with. Her American name was Renee, and her parents were paying for her tuition out of pocket. And she told me that at that time her tuition was like $34,000 a year. And I was like, wow, they can just pay out of pocket for that. I was like, I wish I could do the same thing.
Yeah.
So, but from like Michigan, no, I'm not really seeing too many affluent students. I'm seeing more who either have taken out student loans to pay for it, and they're going to owe 40 grand back when they graduate, or they have been denied financial aid because their parents, quote, make too much money, but they don't make enough to actually pay for them to go to school. And so I think that creates more problems because then students get into other types of loans beyond subsidized government loans.
That's the challenge.
They get into private loans. And once you get into private loans, you open up a whole another world of trouble. So because unlike government loans, there are not as many provisions to help you out once you get out of college.
The government loans now, after some of the revisions that Obama put in, we still have Pell Grants. They're now, I hope, not going to let the interest on those loans double again.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that after you've paid a certain amount over 10 years, the rest might be forgiven. But those private loans can be a killer. And I know kids who are doing it on credit cards. And boy, that gets really scary, when you start putting your college tuition on a credit card because there's going to be no help for that at the other end. And I do know kids who are doing that and putting study abroad and other niceties on credit cards. And wow, that gets to rack up pretty quickly.
It's interesting that you said credit card usage and students paying for credit cards. On the Expensive Learning Facebook page, I kind of put together a note that says College Nightmare 101. It has like all these different facts about your nightmare in college. And like one of the facts was that one survey found that 23% of college students actually use credit cards to pay tuition fees.
See, one out of
So
four.
they come out of pocket. Actually, when I was at Henry Ford Community College, prior to transferring to MSU, my boss for the Inside Track mentoring program was using credit cards to pay her son's tuition, using her own credit cards to pay her son's tuition.
Wow.
And she's like, I'm gonna pay for this, but I want him to go to college. So I guess it's better than taking out your retirement fund, I suppose. But I don't know. Maybe it's worse. I have no idea.
I don't know. Bill's looking a little green around the edges here.
Credit cards are relentless. You have to go bankrupt to get out of them.
I had a little credit card that I actually kind of sort of wasn't paying attention to. I don't remember where I got it once. It was one of those that was in the wallet and I never used. And I looked at the little guy the other day and discovered that because of a glitch, it was like 29% interest on that card. It's like, what?
Yes.
You know, how in the heck? I mean, and you've got to be absolutely ferocious.
Oh yeah, if you
about
miss a
keeping
payment,
track
you
of
could
things.
jump dramatically. There's credit cards are not a good way to go to school.
No.
But I think it's interesting though when you think about it because if you're paying for your tuition with credit cards, would you rather be paying for it with credit cards or private loans? Because if you do file for bankruptcy, you can get rid of the credit card debt. You can't get rid of the loan, right?
Yeah.
No,
Exactly.
no.
Your student loans are there for, they are a burden on your back, and they do not get discharged in bankruptcy. And I don't think a lot of people really understand that. I think young people in particular, they just assume, I'm going to have all those years to work off the debt, so I really don't need to worry. So your movie is designed to raise their awareness of the fact that they do need to get serious about taking a look at the finances when they go.
Yeah, exactly. It's taking a look at the finances. It's making state officials, specifically because this documentary focused primarily on Michigan, but just making state officials aware that you can't cut funding to universities, you can't force tuition up and expect your economy to grow because you want more college graduates if people can't go to college. So one of the things that I do plan to do is I plan to do a feature-length version of the expensive learning. I'm hoping to cover the country as a whole. And some of the things we want to look at are some of the darker sides of tuition raises and student loans, including student debt related suicides, where people have killed themselves because they couldn't afford to pay back their loans. There are girls in Michigan who use sugar daddies to pay for college.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting. I was like, wow, I wonder how many people know that girls are using sugar daddies to pay for their college education. And just other issues in general, too, like there's been economics professor Charles Ballard at MSU, Ron French, a reporter from the Center for Bridge Michigan, have basically all said the same thing, that at the trend that we're going, people won't be able to afford it, except the affluent or the rich and things like that. There was a news article I had read at one point that stated in 2028, a 4-year in-state tuition would be $95,000, and like a private would be $340,000. And I thought, oh, all the Mercedes I could buy with that, like all the Lamborghinis that I would love to have in my driveway.
I got in the elevator the other day with my little $2.50 former backpack. I've moved up in the world to I think a $10 one recently. But it was a $2.50 on sale one that has little skulls on it. I thought that was a nice touch. And I was there with one of the freshmen coming in with her Coach handbag, and I know those run quite a bit of money, so I was thinking to myself, what's wrong with this picture? The real costs in education, I mean, there's a lot of costs in brick and mortar. We're seeing a shift to online education, but the challenge with that is some of those schools are more expensive and have very high default rates. Some of these new private colleges coming on board, some are online, some are brick and mortar, but I think people really need to understand they need to be careful consumers about what kind of education they're getting. A degree alone isn't the answer. The quality of the degree, how much you pay for it, you have to be a good shopper.
Yeah, I think that's something people have to think about too. What I think is really interesting though is when people, it's like you said, the quality of the degree. Where do you get it from? Well, some people say I want a degree from NYU or I want a degree from a prestigious school, and then they look at the price tag and it's $50,000 a year. I mean, at one point I looked at University of Miami, and that was $50,000. I said, there's no way I'm paying 50 grand a year to go to college. I said, there are other schools I can go to that are just as good, at least I think so, and I can pay less. But for some people, that name is really what matters. But then you get all these stories of, I'm $100,000 in debt for a 4-year degree. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, how are you $100,000 in debt for a bachelor's degree? I'm thinking you got 2 masters, PhD, a doctorate. You got a whole bunch of things going on because there's no way you should go be $100,000 in debt for a 4-year college education. But they're willing to spend that amount of money, and then they think, okay, I'll figure it out later. But there's no guarantee you're going to get a job that's going to pay that, first of all, because that's a huge amount of money. And if you did get a job, it's probably not going to pay the amount of money that you need to pay off that $100,000 loan before you die. So.
Well, thank you, Christina. You brought up an important issue, and I hope to get you back because I know you're going to be around for a while, and we're going to talk about this issue frequently because this is one near and dear to my heart. Thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, you're welcome. I would love to come back.
Thank you.
We're
Real
gonna-
interesting.
it
I'm
is.
looking forward to seeing the documentary.
It's good. We're going to be joined now by our resident poet. Should we call you the Lansing Online News Poet Laureate?
Lariat, the poet Lariat.
Poultry? Poultry in motion?
Poultry. Hi.
We didn't get you irritated. A poet irritated is
It's
bad.
nice to be here once again, here in April during Poetry Month.
It is Poetry Month. A wonderful thing. And look at all the hard work Bill puts in getting those poems up
Indeed.
there.
Indeed, that's their
Special spacing.
Special spacing, that is the bane of Bill's existence.
Yeah, I just gotta find poets who just keep it like a
Like
straight-
left.
straight left
I'm looking for the
margin.
left-leaning poets in my life.
So,
Read us a left-leaning poem.
well, I can read you. Well, there is some mention, and this might be a little bit left-leaning. This is what will be in the news tomorrow.
Okay, that's the one I got.
So this is interesting. You're now going to read this from your cell phone.
Yes.
See
Because I
what
haven't
we
printed
have
these
all
off yet.
become? See how dependent we've become on our cell phones?
Yeah, I've been using Google's blog spot for a couple of years now. I'm just type it in. It's relatively simple, and it looks nice when it comes up on the page, and I can link it over to my Facebook page, and people can go over there. So far it's been working okay. And I thought, instead of printing these off, I'll just bring. I thought about bringing my laptop, and I thought, no, I could do this on my iPod.
So it's the
My
first
5-year-old
poem that we've had.
I've seen other people do this like in a darkened bar. It probably shouldn't do that. But on a cell phone. But this one's called "Called or Uncalled," and it starts off with an epigram from Erasmus. My Latin's going to be bad here, but vocatus atque non vocatus Deus aderit, which, if I got the translation right, called or uncalled, God is present. Jung has it engraved over his grave. Well, anyways, called or uncalled. Marx or Aphrodite, Tehran or Jerusalem, Boehner or Barak, Pyongyang or Seoul, guns or butter, the conflict doesn't matter, whether asked or not. Our better self turns on a simple gesture, an open hand that holds nothing.
Ooh,
Nice.
nice.
The world will be able to read it tomorrow.
Now that's going to be tomorrow because I want to
Tomorrow.
reread that.
Yeah, tomorrow.
You know, one of the challenges I think with spoken word poetry is extracting all of the meaning as it's floating by you. I like being able to go back and read it myself, word for word.
Mm-hmm.
And then read it several times.
Yeah.
You get different interpretations. You can pick up a different cadence.
Yeah. And there's all sorts of different types of spoken word poetry, and poetry on the page.
I went to the Black Poets Society meeting again. I'm the advisor for the
Oh.
Black Poets Society on campus. And
Where are they meeting now?
well, they don't meet that often, but they have their annual show at the business college in the big auditorium, which I always think is a strange venue for it. It's one of those where when you walk in the room, it does not have the business college vibe, I must say.
Yeah.
And there was some great stuff there. Have you ever done one of those slam type?
Not recently.
Not
I have
recently.
in the past.
I thought I saw you at one over at the Otherwise Gallery years ago. So you have done that.
Yeah, and there's still an open mic at the Creole Gallery just up the street from where
Oh, yeah?
Otherwise used to be. Third Sunday of each month and around 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Hmm.
But they're on Facebook. You look for Lansing Creole Poets. But the only time I really did a very serious slam was almost 30 years ago at the that bar in Chicago.
That bar in Chicago.
Chicago, where it kind of started.
Really?
I want to say the Green Door, but it's not.
That's the local
And
landmark.
that was a tough crowd.
Was it?
Well, they were several drinks ahead of me, for one thing, and there were the hold up numbers.
Yep.
There were, a couple of people were just chosen at random, and they sort of booed me off. Well, they tried to move me off the stage, but I went finished the poem.
Oh, wow.
I got extra points for that, but it's a poem I had read earlier in the day that people seem to like.
It's just
And a
the
different venue.
context, yeah.
The
Context,
context
yeah. It
matters a
wasn't
lot.
quite bar-y enough for that.
On the way over here, you mentioned a project you're going to be working
Oh,
on
yeah.
that involves Herman Melville
Um,
Herman's coming
and
back for
Moby Dick.
It's called Remaking Moby Dick, an international multimodal storytelling performance.
Can I be the whale?
If you want to, you can, how it's working is a friend of mine, Trish Harris, is dividing up the novel by chapters. There's 135. Each person or group of people gets one chapter. You can do anything with that chapter.
Oh, to express it in some way?
Film, photography,
Web.
nonfiction.
Is it all going on the web?
No, well, at first, let me see if I get this right. She will then video each person's performance or them talking about it or reading their piece, however. The resulting video will be screened in a public location in Karlskrona, Sweden during the Mixing Realities Digital Performance Festival in May 2013. The festival will foreground...
May 2013?
May 2013, so I have to write this poem here pretty soon.
No kidding.
The festival will foreground mixed reality works presented by scholars, curators, and international artists working across media in sound, video, augmented reality, digital, and live performance and dance. And then it'll be repurposed and
The dance of
recontextualized.
Moby Dick.
That would be the dance of Moby Dick.
Starbucks was
I'm gonna be
the
the
first
whale.
mate. Remember that? I want to be at Starbucks.
I'm doing chapter 30.
Yes.
Of course, you remember chapter 30, don't you?
Of course.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
It's right after
Ultimately.
chapter 29.
Chapter 30, it's the pipe. And it's only 4 paragraphs long.
Oh, good move.
And I thought, oh, yes, I'll take that one.
Are we talking a smoking pipe?
Yes, it's Ahab on the deck, and he's sitting on this ivory or tusked chair, and sitting on the windward side of the ship, and smoking this pipe, and he has this short soliloquy about how this used to be a pleasurable experience, but now smoking is it's not doing it for him. He tosses the pipe overboard. That's the whole chapter, in short.
So you're going to do a spoken word poem?
Something about that, yeah. Maybe answering questions like how we identify our comforts, only to toss them away, why we tend to soliloquize, what the point is, and whether the audience is the ones we are with or our past and future selves.
Heavy and deep.
Very deep. Do you have another poem for us? Because we're going to run out of time.
Oh, we're going to run out of time, but we would like to squeeze in one more poem.
One quick poem for,
And it doesn't have to involve a whale.
I could do Boston.
Oh.
Which starts off with another epigram. All the ills of mankind, all the tragic misfortunes that fill the history books, have arisen merely from a lack of skill at dancing. Dancing after disaster. It seems counter to what must be done. But you can pray while dancing. You can ask your God to accept the dance. You can dance for those who no longer can. You can even stand still. But moving, running, suddenly helping was what the day was about. I can't run a marathon, but I can dance. And this is what a man with a bomb could not do, lacking skill at dancing.
Wow.
You may be right.
Maybe.
It may be that if they had danced more, they would have bombed less.
That's what Moliere would have thought.
Mm.
So.
I'm really anxious to see this Moby Dick project.
I want to
it's a
see
great
how you
idea.
do this. Yeah.
You can go to remakingmoby, all one word, .wordpress.com.
All right.
And
Are there
see,
still chapters available?
I do not know.
Hmm.
135 chapters plus the intro and the epilogue and notes. So.
Some of us have video cameras. Some of us are thinking we could do something.
A lot of the sea scenes in there are as a result of Herman Melville's trip to Michigan across Lake Erie.
Bill would know this.
They ran into an incredible storm, and if you look at his notes from
Is
that
that
storm,
right?
they appeared in the book.
Today he could be going down the Grand River in Grand Rapids, and he could be surfing down there as well. Well, thank you very much, Sam.
Thank
This
you
has been
again,
delightful, and this is Lansing Online News Radio. We've been joined tonight by Ray Holman of the UAW, Sam Mills, our poet, and Christina Strong with her film on higher ed. Please come back next Monday at 7 p.m. This is LCC Radio, WLNZ 89.7 here in Lansing, Michigan. I think I only went over by 2 seconds. Wow. That was a good show.
Christina, if you can't parlay that documentary